Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. Old Cole. And when he opened his mouth, black dust poured out instead of words. "You can't be here," I said to Tommy. "You died. We looked for you for days." "I didn't die," Tommy said, tilting his head like a curious dog. "I just came to live with the other children, down in the deep places where it's always dark and cool. We play games, Dutch. Such wonderful games." The other pale children spread out around us, moving without making any sound. Their feet didn't quite touch the ground. They floated an inch or two above the mine floor, drifting like smoke. "Where are the school children?" I demanded. Tommy smiled. "They're here. They're with us now. Want to see them?" He gestured toward the carved tunnel, and 8 more children walked out. But these weren't the pale ones from the 1920s. These were modern kids, wearing the clothes I'd seen them in that morning. Except their skin was starting to turn white, and their eyes were fading from brown and blue to empty black. I recognized Jenny Morrison, the mayor's youngest daughter, Billy Coster, whose dad ran the general store, Sarah Chen, whose family had moved here from California just last year. All 8 children from the school group, but they were changing, becoming something else. "We're having such fun, Mr. Dutch," Jenny said, but her voice echoed like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Won't you stay and play with us?" "Let them go," I said. "They don't belong here." "Neither did we," Tommy replied. "But accidents happen in mines, Dutch. Cave-ins, gas leaks. People get lost in the dark and never find their way out. Then they become like us. Hollow children, the mountain folk call us. Empty inside, filled up with darkness." The temperature kept dropping. My breath came out in white puffs and ice crystals formed in my beard. Carl was shaking so hard he could barely hold his flashlight. "The teachers," I said. "Where are Mrs. Henderson and Miss Parker?" The pale children laughed, a sound like wind through broken glass. "They tried to protect the little ones, tried to keep them away from us, so we sent them away." One of them pointed deeper into the mine, where the main shaft dropped into the lower levels. I saw 2 shapes lying at the bottom of the shaft, twisted and still. They were wearing 1920s clothes now, covered in 40 years of coal dust. "How?" I whispered. "Time moves differently down here," Tommy explained patiently. "Past and present, all mixed up together. The teachers are with the grown-ups from the old disaster now. They'll keep each other company." Carl made a break for it then, running toward the mine entrance. But Smokey Patterson stepped in front of him, no longer looking human at all. His body had turned to living coal, eyes burning red like embers. "Going somewhere, Carl?" Smokey asked. Carl tried to push past him, but Smokey grabbed his wrist. There was a horrible hissing sound like meat hitting a hot skillet. Carl screamed and looked down at his arm. Where Smokey had touched him, Carl's flesh was turning to coal. The change spread up his arm, turning skin and muscle and bone into black stone. Carl kept screaming until the transformation reached his throat, and then he couldn't scream anymore. In seconds, he was a coal statue, perfectly detailed, but completely lifeless. "Oops," Tommy said, not sounding sorry at all. "Sometimes we squeeze too hard." The hollow children started closing in on me, floating closer on all sides. Their black eyes reflected my flashlight beam, and I could see myself trapped in those dark mirrors, surrounded and alone. "Come with us, Dutch," Tommy said. "Come play with us forever. We know so many games. Hide and seek in the deep tunnels, tag in the flooded chambers, ring around the rosy, and we all fall down. The SCO." Old children started singing again, that nursery rhyme. But the words were different now. Ring around the mine shaft. Pockets full of coal dust. Ashes, ashes. We all fall down. There, forming up in the parking lot. That's when we found the first sign something was very, very wrong. 8 lunch boxes, arranged in a perfect circle around the entrance to the old Blackwater mine. I stared at that circle for a full minute, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lunch boxes were opened, sandwiches untouched, thermoses of soup still warm. But they were placed with the kind of precision that made my skin crawl. Each one exactly the same distance from the mine entrance, handles all pointing inward like they were part of some kind of ritual. "Dutch?" Deputy Carl Brennan was standing beside me, flashlight beam dancing across the scene. "This don't look right." Carl was good people, been working search and rescue with me for 6 years. But I could hear something in his voice I'd never heard before. Fear. "No," I said, checking my watch. "It doesn't." The mine entrance was supposed to be sealed. Had been since 1953, when some teenagers got lost down there and we had to bring in specialists from Charleston to get them out. Steel barriers, concrete blocks, warning signs, the whole 9 yards. But somehow those barriers had been moved aside, pushed outward from the inside, like something had opened the mine from within. "Could the kids have done this?" Carl asked, nudging one of the concrete blocks with his boot. Thing had to weigh 200 pounds. I shook my head. 8 kids and 2 teachers? No way. That's when I noticed the silence. In 14 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard quiet like this. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind in the trees. Even the waterfall seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume on the whole world. The quiet pressed against my ears until they started ringing. "You hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" "Exactly." Carl was fiddling with his radio, trying to raise the other search teams. And static filled the air, but underneath it I swear I could hear something else. Something that sounded almost like laughter. Children's laughter, faint and far away. "Dutch, my radio's acting up," Carl said. "You getting anything on yours?" I tried mine. Same static, same faint sound underneath. But when I really focused on it, the laughter stopped being funny. There was something wrong with it, something hollow and cold. "We need to go down there," I said, pointing my flashlight into the mine entrance. The beam seemed to get swallowed up after about 20 feet, like the darkness was thicker than it should be. "Are you crazy? That mine's been closed for good reason." "Carl, there are 10 people missing. 8 of them children." I pulled my climbing rope from my pack, started checking my gear. I'm not leaving them down there. I'd been in that mine before, back in '53. Knew the layout pretty well. Main shaft ran straight back about 400 yards, then branched into 3 smaller tunnels, stable enough as long as you watched for loose ceiling supports. I had my carbide helmet lamp, 150 feet of climbing rope, first aid kit, standard cave rescue gear. But as we approached the entrance, my flashlight started acting strange. The bright white beam turned orange like old lamplight. Carl's did the same thing. "Equipment malfunction," I muttered, but I didn't believe it. I'd changed those batteries that morning. We found the first tracks about 50 feet into the main shaft. Small footprints in the coal dust and mud, leading deeper into the mine. But there was something wrong with them. The prints were the right size for kids, but they had too many toes. An extra joint in each toe, like the tracks were made by something that wasn't quite human. "Dutch," Carl said, voice barely above a whisper. "Look at this." He was shining his orange-tinted light on the mine wall. Someone had written something in the coal dust with their finger. Fresh writing, letters still sharp and clear. "Come and play with us." The handwriting was a child's, but the letters were 8 feet off the ground. "Kids couldn't reach that high," Carl said. "No," I agreed. "They couldn't." That's when we heard the singing. Children's voices, echoing up from deep in the mine. A nursery rhyme I remembered from when I was little. "Ring around the rosy. Pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes. We all fall down." But there were too many voices. Way more than 8 kids. And they were singing in perfect harmony, like a church choir that had been practicing for years. Carl grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here." But I thought about those 8 children, scared and lost in the dark. Thought about my brother Tommy, trapped in his cave all those years ago. No, we go deeper. The temperature dropped as we followed the tracks further into the mine. Our breath started showing in the orange light, and ice began forming on the tunnel walls. In October. Underground. This isn't natural, Carl said, teeth chattering. The singing got louder and closer, but it was coming from ahead of us and behind us at the same time, echoing off the walls in ways that made no sense. That's when we found the teacher's clothes. Mrs. Henderson's blue dress and Miss Parker's red sweater folded neat as you please on a flat rock. No signs of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric. Just their clothes, covered in 40-year-old coal dust from a mine that had been sealed since they were children. And underneath the clothes, carved into the rock with something sharp, were more words. They're ours now. We need backup, Carl said, reaching for his radio again. But when he turned it on, all we heard was that children's laughter, louder now and coming from the radio speaker itself. I tried to raise the other search teams on my radio. Same thing. The laughter was getting closer, echoing through the tunnels around us. But now I could tell it wasn't coming from just 8 voices. There had to be dozens of children laughing, maybe more. Carl, look at your watch. He held up his wrist and I saw his face go white. The hands were moving backwards, spinning in reverse like time itself was unwinding. My compass was spinning too, needle whirling around and around, unable to find magnetic north. Like something down here was interfering with the basic laws of nature. We should go back, Carl whispered. But I couldn't. Those children were down here somewhere, and I wasn't leaving without them. I'd failed my brother 22 years ago. I wouldn't fail again. The main shaft split into 3 smaller tunnels about 300 feet in. I knew from the old mine maps that the left tunnel led to a dead end, the middle one dropped down to the lower levels, and the right tunnel connected to a series of smaller chambers where they used to store equipment. But there was a 4th tunnel now, one that wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. It was carved into the rock face like someone had clawed it out by hand. The opening was small, maybe 4 feet high, just the right size for children to walk through without ducking. The edges were smooth, worn down by years of small hands touching them. That wasn't here in 53, I said. How can you be sure? Because I surveyed every inch of this mine. That tunnel doesn't exist. But it did exist, and the children's tracks led straight into it. The singing was coming from inside the new tunnel, louder now, joined by the sound of children playing. Laughter and running footsteps echoing in the dark. For a moment, it almost sounded normal. Almost sounded like kids having fun. Then I heard my name. Dutch! Dutch! Help us! It was a child's voice, high and scared, coming from deep inside the tunnel. Dutch, we're lost. We can't find the way out. More voices joined in, 8 different children calling for help. I recognized Mrs. Henderson's voice too, and Miss Parker's, begging someone to please let them go home. I'm coming, I shouted into the tunnel. Hold on, I'm coming. But Carl grabbed my arm as I started, toward the opening. Dutch, wait. Something's not right about this. He was pointing at the tunnel walls. They were covered in drawings, children's drawings, done with crayons and chalk. Pictures of stick figures holding hands in circles. Pictures of adults falling into dark holes. Pictures of a man with a ranger's hat and badge walking into a mine and never coming out. The man in the pictures looked like me. These drawings, Carl said. They show us. They show us coming here. He was right. One of the pictures showed 2 men with flashlights, standing exactly where we were standing. Another showed them walking into the tunnel. The last picture showed the tunnel entrance. But the men were gone. Just 2 flashlights lying on the ground. How could they know we were coming? I asked. The voices called again, more desperate now. Dutch, please help us. It's so cold down here. But Carl was backing away from the tunnel entrance. Those aren't the right voices. What do you mean? Listen to them, Dutch. Really listen. I focused on the voices calling for help. At first they sounded normal, scared children begging for rescue. But the more I listened, the more I heard what Carl was hearing. The voices were too perfect, too clear. Like someone was playing a recording. And underneath the words, I could hear something else, a wet sliding sound, like something crawling through the tunnels on its belly. "We need to get out of here," Carl said. "Now!" But before we could move, someone stepped out of the tunnel. It was Smokey Patterson, a local cave expert who'd been helping with search and rescue for 20 years. Except Smokey looked wrong. His skin was pale as cave limestone, and his eyes reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. "Dutch," he said, voice echoing strangely. "Found them. Found the children. They're deeper in. They need help." "Smokey, how did you get out?" "On here. We didn't see you come in." He smiled, but it wasn't Smokey's smile. Too wide, too many teeth. "Been down here a long time, Dutch. Long time. My daddy's been waiting for me." Smokey's father had died in the 1925 mine disaster. I remembered the story from when I was a kid. "Smokey," Carl said carefully, "your daddy's been dead for 40 years. "Not dead," Smokey said, still smiling that wrong smile. "Just waiting. Waiting for more children to come play. And now they're here, and they're ours, and they're never leaving." The temperature dropped another 20 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. Ice started forming on our clothes, on our skin. The mine walls began weeping black liquid that smelled like old coal and something else. Something rotten. That's when Carl screamed. He was staring past me, at something behind me in the tunnel. I turned around and my blood turned to ice water. 8 children were walking out of the smaller tunnel, but they weren't the children from the school group. These kids were wearing clothes from the 1920s, overalls and simple dresses, scuffed boots and wool caps. Their skin was white as paper, and their eyes were completely black. No pupils, no color, just empty darkness. "Hello, Dutch," they said in unison, voices harmonizing perfectly. "We've been waiting for you." One of them stepped forward, a boy about 12 years old with sandy hair and a gap-toothed grin. A boy I recognized even though I hadn't seen him in 22 years. "Hello, big brother," Tommy said. "Want to come play with us?" The world tilted sideways. My little brother Tommy stood there in the mine tunnel, looking exactly like he had the day he died. Same clothes, same haircut, same missing front tooth from when he fell off his bike. He hadn't aged a day in 22 years. "Tommy?" My voice came out as a whisper. "I've been waiting for you, Dutch. Waiting so long. The others said you'd come eventually. They said big brothers always come looking." Carl was backing away, but Smokey Patterson blocked his path. Smokey's skin was turning gray, like old coal, and when he opened his mouth, black dust poured out instead of words. "You can't be here," I said to Tommy. "You died. We looked for you for days." "I didn't die," Tommy said, tilting his head like a curious dog. "I just came to live with the other children, down in the deep places where it's always dark and cool. We play games, Dutch. Such wonderful games." The other pale children spread out around us, moving without making any sound. Their feet didn't quite touch the ground. They floated an inch or two above the mine floor, drifting like smoke. "Where are the school children?" I demanded. Tommy smiled. "They're here. They're with us now. Want to see them?" He gestured toward the carved tunnel, and 8 more children walked out. But these weren't the pale ones from the 1920s. These were modern kids, wearing the clothes I'd seen them in that morning. Except their skin was starting to turn white, and their eyes were fading from brown and blue to empty black. I recognized Jenny Morrison, the mayor's youngest daughter, Billy Coster, whose dad ran the general store, Sarah Chen, whose family had moved here from California just last year. All 8 children from the school group, but they were changing, becoming something else. "We're having such fun, Mr. Dutch," Jenny said, but her voice echoed like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Won't you stay and play with us?" "Let them go," I said. "They don't belong here." "Neither did we," Tommy replied. "But accidents happen in mines, Dutch. Cave-ins, gas leaks. People get lost in the dark and never find their way out. Then they become like us. Hollow children, the mountain folk call us. Empty inside, filled up with darkness." The temperature kept dropping. My breath came out in white puffs, and ice crystals formed in my beard. Carl was shaking so hard he could barely hold his flashlight. "The teachers," I said. "Where are Mrs. Henderson and Miss Parker?" The pale children laughed, a sound like wind through broken glass. "They tried to protect the little ones, tried to keep them away from us, so we sent them away." One of them pointed deeper into the mine, where the main shaft dropped into the lower levels. I saw two shapes lying at the bottom of the shaft, twisted and still. They were wearing 1920s clothes now, covered in 40 years of coal dust. "How?" I whispered. "Time moves differently down here," Tommy explained patiently. "Past and present, all mixed up together. The teachers are with the grown-ups from the old disaster now. They'll keep each other company." Carl made a break for it then, running toward the mine entrance. But Smokey Patterson stepped in front of him, no longer looking human at all. His body had turned to living coal, eyes burning red like embers. "Going somewhere, Carl?" Smokey asked. Carl tried to push past him, but Smokey grabbed his wrist. There was a horrible hissing sound like meat hitting a hot skillet. Carl screamed and looked down at his arm. Where Smokey had touched him, Carl's flesh was turning to coal. The change spread up his arm, turning skin and muscle and bone into black stone. Carl kept screaming until the transformation reached his throat, and then he couldn't scream anymore. In seconds, he was a coal statue, perfectly detailed, but completely lifeless. "Oops," Tommy said, not sounding sorry at all. "Sometimes we squeeze too hard." The hollow children started closing in on me, floating closer on all sides. Their black eyes reflected my flashlight beam, and I could see myself trapped in those dark mirrors, surrounded and alone. "Come with us, Dutch," Tommy said. "Come play with us forever. We know so many games. Hide and seek in the deep tunnels, tag in the flooded chambers, ring around the rosy, and we all fall down. The SCO." Old children started singing again, that nursery rhyme. But the words were different now. "Ring around the mine shaft. Pockets full of coal dust. Ashes, ashes. We all fall down." Their voices harmonized perfectly, hauntingly beautiful, and completely wrong. I felt the song tugging at something deep in my mind, making me want to join in, to sing along, to stay here forever in the dark with my little brother. "I missed you so much, Tommy," I heard myself saying. "I know you did. And now we can be together always. Just take my hand." He reached out to me, his pale fingers stretched toward mine. I wanted to take his hand more than anything in the world, wanted to hug my little brother again, to tell him I was sorry I couldn't save him all those years ago. But something stopped me, a memory from when we were kids, from the last day I saw him alive. We'd been playing down by the creek, and Tommy had found a songbird with a broken wing. He'd insisted on trying to help it, singing to it while we tried to make a little splint. "You remember that song you used to sing to hurt animals?" I asked. "The one Mom taught us?" Tommy's face changed, confusion flickering across his features. I don't... I started singing, my voice shaky but getting stronger. "Hush now, baby. Don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. Close your eyes and go to sleep. In your dreams, no need to weep." It was an old song, one our mother had sung to us when we were scared or hurt. Tommy used to sing it to every injured creature we found, birds, squirrels, even bugs. The hollow children recoiled like I'd thrown holy water on them. Their harmonious singing dissolved into hisses and moans. The school children pressed their hands to their ears, their transformations stuttering and reversing slightly. "Stop," Tommy said. But his voice was different now, smaller, more like the brother I remembered. I kept singing, backing toward the mine entrance. The carbide flame on my helmet grew brighter, casting harsh white light that made the hollow children retreat further. "Dutch, don't. Leave me again," Tommy called out, sounding lost and young and afraid. But I knew the truth now. That wasn't my brother. My brother was gone, had been gone for 22 years. This was just something wearing his shape, using his voice to lure me into the dark. "Goodbye, Tommy," I whispered, and ran for the entrance. I made it out of that mine. but I didn't make it out unchanged. The school children were found the next morning, sitting in a perfect circle around the mine entrance, alive but different. They spoke in unison for weeks afterward, finishing each other's sentences like they shared one mind. They avoided sunlight, preferred cold rooms, and their parents swore their children's laughter sounded hollow, like it was echoing up from somewhere deep underground. Mrs. Henderson and Miss Parker were found too, but not where they should have been. Search teams discovered their bodies in a section of the mine that had been sealed since 1925, with the other victims of the original disaster. The coroner said they'd been dead for decades, but that was impossible. I'd seen them alive just the day before. The state authorities blamed it all on gas leaks, said the whole search team had suffered from hallucinations caused by methane exposure. They sealed the mine with concrete and steel, put up new barriers, and ordered it patrolled around the clock. But I know what I saw down there, and I know those barriers won't hold forever. I transferred out of West Virginia 3 months later. Couldn't work with children anymore. Couldn't go underground. Couldn't even look at caves without my hands shaking. Ended up in the desert parks of Arizona, where there's nothing but sun and open sky and no place for hollow children to hide. But every October, I still get letters from folks in Tucker County. Children going missing near Blackwater Falls, strange lights in the old mine shafts, voyons, says singing nursery rhymes in the fog, and every few years another school group gets too close to that sealed entrance and doesn't come back the same. The mountains remember every tragedy, and some tragedies never end. The hollow children are still down there, waiting in the dark, playing their games and singing their songs, and they're always looking for new playmates. So, if you ever find yourself in West Virginia near Blackwater Falls in October, when the fog rolls thick through Canaan Valley, remember this story. Remember that some places hold on to their dead too tight. And if you hear children singing in the distance, don't go looking for them. They're not the kind of children you want to find. My hands still shake when I write this, 30 years later. The frostbite never fully healed, and I lost most of the hearing in my left ear from that night in the mine. But those are small prices to pay for getting out alive. Sometimes, on quiet nights in the desert, I still hear them singing. Tommy's voice mixed in with all the others, calling my name across the years, and sometimes, God help me, I want to answer. But I won't go back to those mountains. I won't go back to the dark places where the hollow children play. Some games are too dangerous to join, and some brothers are already too far gone to save. My name is Catherine Morningstar, but everyone calls me Kit. I've been a park ranger here at Grandfather Mountain for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old peaks could throw at me. Bears, mountain lions, lost hikers, flash floods, you name it. I've dealt with it. But what happened in November of 1975 changed everything I thought I knew about this mountain. I grew up hearing my Cherokee grandmother's stories about Kekla Kudla, the stone giant who lived deep in the mountain's heart. She'd tell me these tales while we sat by the fire, her weathered hands moving like birds as she spoke. The mountain remembers everything, Kit, she'd say. Every footstep, every breath, every drop of blood spilled on its rocks. Back then, I figured they were just stories meant to teach respect for nature. Now I know better. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, November 18th. 6 experienced hikers from the Asheville Mountain Club had failed to return from their planned 2-day trek along the Rough Ridge to Callaway Peak Trail. These weren't weekend warriors. This group had been hiking together for over 5 years. Sarah Chen, the group leader, could read weather patterns better than most meteorologists. If they were missing, something bad had happened. I loaded my pack with extra supplies, first aid kit, emergency blanket, rope, flares, and my .30-06 rifle. The weather forecast called for the season's first major snow, with temperatures dropping to 15 below. Up on the peaks, it would be even colder. The wind was already picking up as I started up the trail. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost covered every surface. The forest felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. Usually you'd hear squirrels chattering, birds calling, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But today, nothing. Even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. I found their furs, this campsite easily enough. Everything was neat and tidy, just like you'd expect from experienced hikers. But something bothered me. The fire pit was cold, but not just cold. It looked like it had never been used. The stones were arranged perfectly, but there were no ash marks, no scorch marks, nothing. Yet their gear showed they'd definitely spent the night. A quarter-mile up the trail, I found the first real sign of trouble. A massive boulder, easily 2 tons, sat right in the middle of the path. But here's the thing. I'd walked this trail just 3 days earlier, and that boulder had been 30 feet to the left, nestled between 2 pine trees. Now it sat dead center on the trail like someone had picked it up and moved it. I tried to radio base camp, but all I got was static. My watch had stopped at 3:33, though I could have sworn it was working fine that morning. When I pulled out my compass to check my bearings, the needle spun in slow circles, never settling on any direction. That's when I found the first footprint. It was pressed deep into a flat section of granite, the kind of rock that should be impossible to mark without heavy machinery. The print was huge, at least 26 inches long, and shaped like a human foot, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, the heel too broad. But what really made my blood run cold was how deep it went. This thing, whatever it was, had pressed that print 2 inches down into solid rock. I knelt beside it, running my fingers along the edges. The granite was smooth, worn by whatever had made this mark. This wasn't fresh. This print had been here for a long time. Maybe a very long time. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of snow and something else. Something old and earthy, like wet stone and moss. I shouldered my pack and kept climbing, following the faint trail of broken branches and disturbed leaves that marked the hiker's passage. As I climbed higher, the wrongness in the air grew stronger. My rifle scope had developed a crack down the middle, even though I'd been careful not to bang it against anything. The metal on my pack buckles felt ice cold, even through my gloves, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard voices calling for help. But they weren't coming from ahead of me on the trail. They were coming from below, from deep inside the mountain itself. The blood trail started just past the 4,500-foot marker. Dark red drops, already frozen solid, dotted the snow-covered rocks. But they weren't following the trail anymore. They led straight up the cliff face. A vertical wall of granite that no human could climb without ropes and gear. I followed the blood drops as far as I could, craning my neck to peer up the impossibly steep rock face. About 50 feet up, I could see what looked like another massive footprint, this one embedded in the cliff wall itself. But that was impossible. Nothing could put that much pressure on vertical stone. The voices called again, echoing strangely in the thin mountain air. This time I could make out words. "Help us! We're trapped!" It sounded like Sarah Chen, the group leader. But the voice was coming from somewhere beneath my feet, muffled by tons of rock and earth. I pressed my ear to the ground, listening. Yes, definitely voices, definitely coming from underground. But how could they be underground? There weren't any known cave systems in this area. I'd studied every geological survey of Grandfather Mountain, and this section was supposed to be solid granite all the way down. Following the cliff base, I found something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Embedded in the solid rock face, about chest high, was a backpack. Not sitting against the rock, actually embedded in it, like the stone had grown around it. The fabric was perfectly preserved, but when I touched it, it felt as old as the mountain itself. I pulled out my knife and carefully cut away what fabric I could reach. Inside was a leather jewel. Now, the pages yellow and brittle. The last entry was dated September 15, 1863, written in a shaky hand. The sound started 3 days ago, like thunder but coming from inside the mountain. Jenkins swears he saw eyes in the stone big as dinner plates and red as blood. We should never have come here. The Cherokee were right to stay away. Something lives in this place, something old and angry. If anyone finds this, turn back. Turn back before... The entry ended there, the rest of the page torn away. My hands were shaking as I put the journal back. Civil War deserters had hidden in these mountains, That much was historical fact. But this suggested they'd encountered something up here, something that had trapped them just like the hikers. That's when I noticed my rifle again. The crack in the scope had grown longer, spiderwebbing across the lens, and the metal barrel was warm to the touch despite the freezing air. I ejected around to check it. The brass casing was tarnished black as if it had aged decades in the span of hours. The ground beneath my feet trembled. Not an earthquake, something else. Something moving deep below, taking massive steps that shook the mountain's bones. With each tremor, small rocks tumbled from the cliff face above. The footsteps, if that's what they were, seemed to be following me, staying directly beneath as I moved along the trail. I found the second campsite just as the snow began to fall. Their gear was scattered everywhere, sleeping bags torn open, cooking pots dented and bent. But again, no signs of struggle, no drag marks, nothing to suggest what had happened to 6 grown adults. Then I saw the cave. It wasn't on any map, wasn't marked on any geological survey I'd ever seen. Just a dark opening in the cliff face, maybe 8 feet high and perfectly round like a giant borehole. The edges were smooth, worn by time and weather. From air flowed out of it, carrying that same earthy smell I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now. And from somewhere deep inside came the sound of voices calling for help. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped to the cave mouth. The beam revealed smooth stone walls that curved gently downward, disappearing into darkness. The rock here was different, not the rough granite of the mountain face, but something older, polished to a mirror shine by countless years of what? Water? Wind? Or something else? "Hello?" I called into the darkness. "Sarah, can you hear me?" The voices stopped immediately, as if someone had thrown a switch. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, from the very depths of the cave, came a sound I'll never forget. A low, rumbling laugh that seemed to come from the stone itself. I backed away from the cave mouth, my rifle ready. That's when I noticed the bones. They were scattered around the cave entrance, some still bearing scraps of cloth. Old bones, bleached white by time and weather. Human bones, and there were a lot of them. The snow was falling harder now, and the temperature was dropping fast. I had to make a choice. Head back down the mountain and wait for the storm to pass, or go into that cave and find out what had happened to the hikers. The voices started calling again, fainter now, but definitely coming from inside the cave. Sarah's voice, calling my name. "Kit! Kit! We're hurt! We need help!" But Sarah Chen had never met me before this search began. She wouldn't know my name. I shouldered my rifle and stepped into the cave, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The walls were carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Not Cherokee, not European, something far older. As I walked deeper, the carvings seemed to move in the shifting light, writhing and changing like living things. The air grew warmer with each step, and I could smell something new now. Not just earth and stone, but something organic, something alive. 50 feet in, the cave opened into a vast chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but what I could see made my blood freeze. Bodies, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the cave floor. Some were recent enough that I could still see scraps of modern clothing. Others were just bones arranged in neat piles along the walls. And some looked like they'd been turned to stone while still alive, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. At the center of the chamber sat 6 backpacks, arranged in a perfect circle. I approached the backpacks carefully, my rifle ready and my nerves stretched tight as piano wire. Each pack bore the name tags of the missing hikers: Sarah Chen, Mike Rodriguez, Janet Sullivan, Tom Bradley, Lisa Park, and David Kim. Their gear was neatly arranged, as if they'd just stepped away for a moment. But there was no sign of the hikers themselves. I knelt beside Sarah's pack and opened it. Everything was there. Clothes, food, water, even her expensive camera. I turned on the camera and scrolled through the photos. The last few shots made my hands shake. The first showed the group setting up camp, all smiling and happy. The second showed them around their campfire, roasting marshmallows. But in the third photo, taken just after sunset, there was something else in the frame. In the background, barely visible between two trees, stood a massive figure. It looked like a man, but wrong, too tall, too broad, with arms that hung nearly to the ground. The fourth photo was a close-up of that figure. It was made of stone, not covered in stone, but actually made of it. Living granite, with moss and lichens growing in the cracks and crevices of its body. Its eyes glowed red in the camera flash, and its mouth was open in what might have been a roar or a laugh. The final photo was just darkness, but I could hear something on the audio, a sound like grinding stone getting closer and closer to the camera. I stuffed the camera into my pack and stood up. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath, my feet. Massive, grinding steps that shook dust from the cave ceiling and made my teeth ache. The sound echoed strangely in the chamber, making it impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. Then the walls began to glow. It started as just a faint light, like embers buried in ash. But it grew brighter, revealing the true size of the chamber. It was enormous, easily 100 feet across and just as high. And every surface was covered in those strange symbols, all of them now glowing with soft red light. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear something breathing, slow, deep breaths that moved air like a bellows. And with each breath, the red glow pulsed brighter. "You have Cherokee blood," a voice said. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the stone walls. The voice was deep and old, like rocks grinding together at the bottom of a river. "I can smell it on you." I raised my rifle, though I had no idea what to aim at. "Where are the hikers? What did you do with them?" The breathing stopped. Then came that grinding laugh again. "They took from me," the voice said. "All of them take. They cut my trees, blast my stone, pour poison in my streams. They build their roads through my bones, and wonder why I am angry." Something moved in the shadows at the far end of the chamber, a shape too large and wrong to be human, but walking upright on two legs. As it stepped into the red glow, I saw it clearly for the first time. Quetzalcoatl, the stone giant from my grandmother's stories. It stood 15 feet tall, its body carved from living granite. Moss and small plants grew from cracks in its hide, and its eyes burned like coals in the darkness. When it moved, I could hear stone grinding against stone, like tectonic plates shifting deep in the earth. "Your grandmother knew," it said, taking another step closer. "She understood the old ag, rements, but you have forgotten. All of you have forgotten." I kept my rifle trained on its chest, though I doubted bullets would do much good against living stone. "The hikers, are they alive?" It gestured toward the far wall with one massive arm. There, embedded in the rock face like fossil insects in amber, were 6 human shapes. The hikers turned to stone but still conscious, their eyes moving frantically in their granite faces. "They sleep in my stone," Quetzalcoatl said, "as all trespassers sleep, as you will sleep." The creature raised its arms and the cave began to shake. Cracks appeared in the walls, spreading like spider webs. Chunks of ceiling crashed down around me, and I could feel the mountain itself shifting, responding to the giant's will. I thought of my grandmother's stories, trying to remember everything she'd told me about Quetzalcoatl. He was a guardian, she'd said, protector of sacred places. But he'd been driven mad by the coming of the white settlers, by the mining and logging and building that scarred his mountain home. "Wait!" I called out, dodging a falling boulder. "I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to protect." The shaking stopped. The creature tilted its massive head, studying me with those burning eyes. "Protect?" it rumbled. "You carry the white man's gun. You wear the white man's uniform. You speak the white man's words. But I also carry my grandmother's teachings," I said, slowly lowering my rifle. "She told me about you, about the old agreements between your people and mine." The red glow in the chamber dimmed slightly. Kekle Kudle took a step back, its stone features shifting into something that might have been curiosity. "What was her name, this grandmother of yours?" "Mary Morningstar," I said, but the Cherokee called her Walks with Stars. The reaction was immediate. The creature's eyes blazed brighter, and it and forward, studying my face intently. "Walks with Stars came to me in the year of the Great Sickness," it said slowly. "She brought offerings of tobacco and cornmeal. She spoke the old words, made the old promises. She said her people would remember." "Some of us do remember," I said. "I remember." The creature was silent for a long moment, and I could feel it weighing my words, testing them for truth. The chamber held its breath. Finally, it spoke again. "Then you know what I am, what I guard." I nodded. "The heart of the mountain, the sacred places where the earth's spirit lives. And you know what has been done to these places, the wounds that have been carved into my flesh." I thought of all the development I'd seen over the years. The roads blasted through solid rock, the vacation homes built on ancient burial grounds, the ski slopes carved into virgin forest, each one a cut in the mountain's living flesh. "I know," I said, "and I've tried to stop what I could." "But you are only one," Kekle Kudle said. "And they are many, always taking, always forgetting that the mountain lives." The creature moved closer, and I could feel the heat radiating from its stone body. Up close, I could see that the granite was shot through with veins of crystal that pulsed with inner light. This wasn't just animate stone. This was the mountain itself, given form and will. "The 6 who sleep in my stone," it continued, "they came with machines, cameras to steal my image, tools to chip away my substance, voices that echoed in my sacred places without permission. They took without asking, as all of them do." I thought of the hiker's gear, of Sarah's expensive camera, and the photos I'd seen. They'd been documenting the mountain, probably for some kind of guidebook or website. To them, it was just research. To the creature, it was violation. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The stone giant smiled, an expression both terrible and sad on its granite features. "I want what your grandmother promised," it said. "I want a guardian who remembers the old laws, and someone to stand between my sacred places and those who would wound them." The chamber began to shake again, but gently this time, like a sleeping giant settling into deeper rest. The red glow faded to a warm amber, and I could hear something moving in the walls. Not threatening now, but welcoming. "Will you take the old oath?" Kekle Kudle asked. "Will you speak the words your grandmother spoke?" I looked at the 6 stone figures trapped in the wall, their eyes pleading silently for release. Then I looked back at the creature, at the ancient sadness in its burning eyes. My grandmother had always said that some promises were bigger than one person's life. Some responsibilities passed from generation to generation, whether we wanted them or not. I knelt on the cave floor and began to speak the Cherokee words my grandmother had taught me, words I hadn't used since I was a child. The Cherokee words felt strange on my tongue after so many years of speaking only English. But as I spoke them, something deep in the mountain seemed to wake up and listen. The stone walls pulsed with warm light, and I could feel Kekle Kudle's ancient presence settling around me like a heavy blanket. "Nvi ayeli, adanvdo." "The mountain hears my voice," I began, remembering the ritual phrases my grandmother had made me practice. "Nvi galiski, gadulvi doyu." The mountain knows my heart. I offer myself as guardian. As the words left my mouth, I felt something change inside me. The air tasted different, sharper, more alive. I could suddenly sense things I'd never noticed before. The slow pulse of groundwater flowing through rock, the minute shifts in temperature as the mountain breathed, the whispered conversations of roots and stone deep beneath the earth. Kekle Kudle nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd entered the cave, the creature's expression softened. "The old Ordees still have power," it rumbled. Your grandmother taught you well. But words alone are not enough. You must understand what you are accepting." The giant gestured toward the stone wall, where the hikers were trapped. They violated the sacred places without knowledge or intent. In the old days, ignorance might have been forgiven. But now there are too many, and the mountain grows weaker with each wound. I could see the hikers' eyes tracking our conversation, wide with terror but also with desperate hope. Sarah Chen's stone lips seemed to be trying to form words, though no sound could escape her granite throat. "Can you free them?" I asked. "That depends on you," Kekla said. "Take the full oath, become the mountain's true guardian, and I will release them. But understand, once you speak these words, you can never leave this place. The mountain will be your home, your responsibility, your life. You will age as the stones age, think as the forest thinks, feel every cut and wound as if it were carved into your own flesh." I thought about my life down in the valley, my small apartment, my few friends, my routines and responsibilities. None of it seemed very important anymore. Not compared to the ancient sadness in this creature's eyes, or the desperate hope in the stone faces of 6 innocent people. "And if I refuse?" The creature's expression hardened. "Then they remain as they are, and I continue to protect my domain the only way I know how. More will come, and more will sleep in stone, until perhaps the others learn to stay away." I looked again at the trapped hikers. They'd made a mistake, but they didn't deserve this fate. No one did. "What exactly would I be guarding?" I asked. Kekla raised one massive hand, and the cave wall became transparent, like looking through clear water. Beyond it, I could see a vast network of chambers and passages, all carved from living rock. Some glowed with the same red light as the symbols on the walls. Others pulsed with different colors, blue, green, gold, as if different types of energy flowed through them. "This is the mountain's heart," the creature explained. "The place where the earth's life force gathers and flows. Your people called it Gadugi, the place of cooperation between all living things. Every stream that flows from this mountain, every tree that grows on its slopes, every animal that makes its home here draws life from this place." I could see it now. Threads of light flowing outward from the central chambers, spreading through the mountain like veins carrying blood through a body. Where the light flowed strongest, the forest was thickest. The streams ran clearest, the wildlife thrived. But I could also see the dark spots, places where the light had been cut off or corrupted. Roads that severed the energy flow. Clear cuts that broke the connection between forest and stone. Developments that blocked the natural channels. "The wounds grow deeper every year," Kekla continued. "I am old, and I grow tired of fighting alone. I need someone who can walk in both worlds, who understands the mountain's needs, but can also speak to those who would harm it." The transparent wall showed me more visions, myself standing before surveyors and developers, somehow convincing them to change their plans. Speaking at town meetings, guiding respectful hikers away from sacred sites, healing the damaged places through some kind of connection I didn't yet understand. "You would have power," the creature said, as if reading my thoughts. "The mountain would lend you its strength when needed, but you would also bear its pain. Every tree cut, every stream polluted, every sacred site violated. You would feel it all." I thought of my grandmother, of the stories she'd told me about the old days when humans and nature spirits worked together, of the responsibilities that came with Cherokee blood, the duties that some of us had forgotten but could never truly escape. "If I do this," I said slowly, "what happens to my job? My life down there?" "You will find ways to serve both," Kekla replied. "The mountain is patient. It will give you time to arrange things properly. But eventually you must choose the old ways or the new." I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it, spending my life on this mountain, connected to something ancient and powerful, protecting one of the last truly wild places from those who would destroy it. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the life I was meant for. When I opened my eyes, the stone faces of the hikers were still watching me, still hoping. Their fate rested in my decision. "I'll do it," I said. Keklakudla's smile was like sunrise on granite. "Then speak the binding words," it said. "Speak them and become what your grandmother always knew you could be." The creature began to chant in a language older than Cherokee, older than any human tongue. The words seemed to come from the stone itself, rising up through my feet and filling my chest with their power. Without understanding how I knew them, I began to chant along. As we chanted, the chamber filled with light, not the red glow from before, but pure white radiance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I felt the mountain's vast consciousness touching mine, sharing its memories and knowledge and pain. I saw centuries of history flash past. The arrival of the first Cherokee peoples, the coming of European settlers, the slow encroachment of modern civilization. And through it all, the mountain endured, adapting, protecting what it could, mourning what was lost. The light grew brighter, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. My connection to the mountain deepened, became permanent and unbreakable. I could sense every living thing on its slopes, feel the slow pulse of geological time, taste the mineral content of underground streams. I was still Catherine Morningstar, but I was also something more now, something older and wilder and tied to the earth in ways I was only beginning to understand. When the light faded, the hikers were free. They stumbled away from the wall, gasping and shaking, their bodies slowly returning to flesh and blood. Sarah Chen fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she stared at her own hands. Real hands, not granite anymore. "You're safe," I told them, helping Sarah to her feet. "You're going to be okay." But even as I spoke the comforting words, I could feel Keklakudla's presence in my mind, sharing his knowledge of what had to happen next. The hikers couldn't remember what they'd seen. The trauma of it would break their minds, and the secret of the mountain's heart had to be protected. They would remember getting lost in a freak snowstorm, taking shelter in a cave, being rescued by a park ranger. Nothing more. I touched each of them lightly on the forehead, and their eyes went blank for a moment. When awareness returned, they looked around the cave with confusion but no fear. "Thank goodness you found us, Ranger," Mike Rodriguez said. "We've been trapped in here since the storm hit. How long were we unconscious?" "About 18 hours, I replied, helping them gather their scattered gear. "We need to get you down the mountain before the weather gets worse." As we prepared to leave, I caught one last glimpse of Keklakudla. The stone giant had retreated to the shadows at the back of the chamber, but his red eyes still glowed in the darkness. He nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals. "Remember your oath," his voice whispered in my mind. "The mountain is yours to protect now." I led the hikers out of the cave and down the mountain, moving quickly through the gathering storm. By the time we reached the ranger station, the snow was falling thick and fast, covering all traces of our passage. The official report was simple. 6 hikers caught in severe weather, temporarily lost, rescued without injury, no O, and questioned it. No one looked too closely at the details. But things were different for me after that day. I started noticing things I'd never seen before. The way certain areas of the forest seemed to glow with health, while others felt somehow diminished. I could sense when someone was planning to build in a sensitive area, and I always found ways to discourage them. Sometimes it was as simple as pointing out potential landslide risks or endangered species habitats. Other times, the mountain itself would intervene. Equipment would malfunction. Permits would be mysteriously lost. Investors would suddenly change their minds. My hair started showing gray streaks even though I was only 33, and my eyes, sometimes when I looked in the mirror, they seemed to hold flecks of red light deep in their depths. The Cherokee elders noticed the change in me. They began inviting me to ceremonies I'd never been allowed to attend before, treating me with a respect I hadn't earned through any conventional means. Old Sam Littlefeather, the medicine man, would sometimes look at me and nod knowingly. "The mountain has claimed you," he said one day. "Your grandmother would be proud." 5 years have passed since that night in the cave. I'm still a park ranger, still doing my job, but now I have a deeper purpose. I guide visitors to the safe places, the areas where they can experience the mountain's beauty without disturbing its sacred heart. I work with environmental groups, helping them understand which battles are worth fighting and which ones the mountain can handle on its own. And sometimes, late at night when the moon is dark, I walk the hidden trails that only I can see, checking on the network of energy that flows through the mountain's bones. Kekla is always there, a patient presence in the depths, trusting me to keep the old promises. The hikers never came back. They moved away from North Carolina, drawn to flatter, safer places by instincts they didn't understand. Sarah Chen became a nature photographer, but she never again took pictures of wild places without permission. The mountain had taught them respect in ways they couldn't consciously remember. I tell you this story not to frighten you, but to warn you. Grandfather Mountain is a beautiful place, worthy of your respect and wonder. But remember that some places are older than our understanding, deeper than our maps can show. The Cherokee knew this, and their knowledge kept the balance for thousands of years. Treat the mountain with reverence. Take only pictures, leave only footprints. And if you ever find yourself on a trail that isn't marked on any map or hear voices calling from places where no voices should be, remember that the mountain is alive and watching. Some agreements are written in stone, and stone remembers everything. I am Catherine Morningstar, guardian of Grandfather Mountain, keeper of the old promises, and I'll be here, watching and protecting, for as long as the stones endure. My name is William Crowfield, but everyone calls me Billy. I've been a forest ranger for 19 years now, patrolling the dark woods of Kanawha State Forest in West Virginia. People think I'm crazy for working the night shift, but after what I saw in Vietnam, the quiet darkness feels like home. I started this job in 1968 when I got back from the war. I was 21 and couldn't sleep at night anyway, so why not get paid for staying awake? The forest doesn't judge you for jumping at loud noises or checking your back every few minutes. Out here, being careful keeps you alive. My beat covers the Poly Hollow area, about 15 miles from Point Pleasant. Most folks around here still talk about the Silver Bridge collapse 20 years ago. 46 people died when that bridge fell into the Ohio River on December 15, 1967. Some say they saw a giant flying creature with red eyes before it happened. They called it the Mothman. I never believed those stories. People see weird things when they're scared or sad. After a tragedy like that bridge collapse, your mind plays tricks on you. I should know. I spent months seeing dead Vietnamese soldiers in my peripheral vision after I came home, but that was before I saw those red eyes myself. The forest is different in December. The bare trees look like skeleton hands reaching up at the gray sky. Most of the animals are sleeping or moved south for winter. It gets dark by 5 o'clock, and the cold makes everything brittle. Twigs snap under your boots like small bones. On December 18, 1987, I was checking the old TNT bunkers left over from World War II. The military stored explosives there during the war, and even though they're empty now, kids sometimes try to explore them. My job is to keep people out and make sure no one gets hurt. The rain had been falling all day, turning to sleet as the temperature dropped. My radio rackled with static from the storm. I was alone out there, which was normal. The nearest backup was 45 minutes away on a good night. And this wasn't a good night. I'd been getting reports all week about something killing cattle on the farms near the forest. 3 cows found dead, all drained of blood but no bite marks or claw wounds. The state vet said it was probably a large bird, maybe a great blue heron, or even an escaped exotic bird from someone's private collection. That made sense to me. I've seen what wild animals can do. In 19 years of night patrols, I've handled everything from bear attacks to rabid raccoons. A big bird wouldn't be the strangest thing I'd dealt with. But as I walked through those dark woods that night, something felt wrong. The rain was steady but quiet, patting against the dead leaves. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, showing wet tree trunks and muddy ground. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Even in winter, you usually hear something at night. An owl calling, a branch creaking in the wind, maybe a mouse rustling through the leaves. But tonight, nothing. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I stopped walking and listened harder. The only sound was rain hitting my coat and the soft squelch of mud under my boots. Even the wind had died down. In nearly 2 decades of night work, I'd never heard the forest this quiet. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Crowfield checking in from Sector 7. Static answered me. I tried again, but all I got was white noise. Sometimes the hills block radio signals, especially in bad weather. I wasn't worried yet. I kept walking toward the TNT bunkers, my flashlight sweeping left and right. The beam caught something shiny ahead, probably just wet leaves or a piece of trash. But as I got closer, I saw it. It was a piece of torn metal, twisted and sharp. It looked like part of a car bumper. I followed my light deeper into the trees and found the rest of it. A blue pickup truck, probably 10 years old, wrapped around a massive oak tree. The impact had been hard enough to split the trunk. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was that the truck was 20 feet off the ground. I stood there in the rain, staring up at this impossible thing. The truck hung in the branches like some giant bird had picked it up and dropped it there. The windshield was completely gone, not just broken, but missing entirely. Pieces of glass sparkled on the ground below like fallen stars. I called out, but no one answered. If someone had been in that truck when it hit, they were either dead or long gone. But how does a truck end up in the top of a tree? Even if it hit a ramp going 100 miles an hour, physics doesn't work that way. I was still staring up at the truck when my night vision goggles started acting up. The image flickered and rolled, showing nothing but static. I pulled them off, checked the battery, put them back on. Same thing, just white and gray snow across the lenses. That's when I heard it. A sound like wind through feathers, but deeper, louder, like something huge was flying overhead. I looked up, but all I could see was the black outline of tree branches against the dark sky. The sound moved from left to right, circling me. Whatever was making it had to be big, bigger than any bird I knew about. The sound faded, moving deeper into the forest. I stood there for another minute listening, but it didn't come back. My night vision goggles were working again, showing everything in green and black. The truck was still hanging in the tree, impossible but real. I took pictures and made notes, like I always do. Filed a report about the abandoned vehicle and the equipment malfunction. Drove home before dawn and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that truck hanging in the branches. I'd been a forest ranger for 19 years. I'd seen bears, wildcats, and things that would make city folks wet themselves. I thought I knew what lived in these woods. I was wrong. 3 days later, I got a call that changed everything. "Billy, we got another one." Sheriff Mason's voice crackled through my radio. "Farmer named Henderson found his prize bull dead this morning, same as the others, no blood left in the body." I drove out to Henderson's farm just after sunset. The old man met me at his gate, shaking his head. Tom Henderson had been raising cattle for 40 years. He wasn't the type to get spooked easily. "Never seen anything like it, Billy," he said, leading me toward his pasture. "Found Chester this morning, hanging from the power lines." "Hanging how?" I asked. "By his back legs, 15 feet up in the air, strung up like someone was butchering him. But there ain't no cuts, no wounds, nothing. Just empty." We walked across the muddy field with our flashlights. The power lines ran along the edge of Henderson's property, carrying electricity from the local plant to the towns beyond. The poles were about 20 feet tall, thick wooden posts that could support a lot of weight, but not the weight of a 2,000-pound bull. Chester hung there, like Henderson said, suspended by his back legs from the power line itself. The wire hadn't broken, hadn't even sagged much. The bull's massive body swayed slightly in the wind, casting weird shadows across the field. "How long has he been up there?" I asked. "Don't know. Heard some commotion around midnight. Sounded like Chester was upset about something. But hell, Billy, how do you get a bull up on a power line? Would take a crane and a whole crew of men." I walked around the pole, studying the ground. No tire tracks, no footprints, except Henderson's and mine. No sign that any heavy equipment had been here, just muddy grass and a few scattered hoof prints where Chester had been walking before whatever happened to him. We need to call the power company, I said. Get them to cut the line so we can bring him down. Already did. They'll be here in the morning. But Billy, there's something else you need to see. Henderson led me to his barn. Inside, his other cattle were pressed against the far wall, as far from the doors they could get. 12 head of cattle, all huddled together like they were trying to hide from something. They've been like this since last night, Henderson said. Won't eat, won't drink, won't come near the door. Animals know things, Billy. They smell danger better than we do. I studied the cattle. Their eyes were wide, showing white around the edges. A couple of them were shaking. I'd seen animals scared before, but this was different. This was pure terror. Tom, you should keep your animals inside for a few days. Whatever's doing this, it might come back. You think it's still out there? I looked back toward the power lines where Chester's body hung like a dark flag against the night sky. Yeah, I think it's still out there. I drove back to the forest, but I couldn't concentrate on my regular patrol. My mind kept going back to that bull, hanging impossible and empty. 3 cattle in 1 week, all found in places they couldn't have gotten to on their own. All drained of blood with no visible wounds. Around 2 in the morning, I was checking the area near the old TNT bunkers when my radio started picking up something strange. Instead of the usual dispatcher chatter, I heard what sounded like military communications from decades ago. Baker 2-7, this is Command. Report your position. Command, we have movement in Sector 4. Large flying object, repeat, large flying object over the ammunition storage. Baker 2-7, are you certain? Confirm visual contact. Affirmative, Command. Object is... Jesus Christ, what is that thing? The transmission cut to static. I tried changing channels, but every frequency was dead except for that old military chatter. It faded in and out like a ghost. TIE signal. Words from 1943 somehow reaching through time to my radio in 1987. I was still listening to the strange broadcast when I saw the lights. Red lights, moving through the trees about a quarter-mile away. At first I thought it might be someone with a flashlight, maybe kids messing around near the bunkers. But these lights were too bright, too red, and they moved wrong, floating up and down like they weren't attached to anything solid. I grabbed my spotlight and headed toward them. The lights seemed to notice my approach and started moving away, deeper into the forest. I followed, pushing through wet branches and stepping over fallen logs. The lights led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, even after 19 years of patrolling these woods. It was perfectly circular, about 50 feet across, with no trees or bushes growing inside it. The ground was bare dirt, packed hard like concrete. In the center of the clearing stood a young woman. She was maybe 20 years old, wearing a white dress that should have been muddy and torn after walking through the forest. But it was perfectly clean, almost glowing in my flashlight beam. Her long brown hair hung straight down her back, and she wasn't moving. "Miss?" I called out. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. Didn't even turn around. I walked closer, my hand on my radio in case I needed backup. As I got nearer, I could see she was barefoot. Her feet should have been cut up from walking through the woods, but they looked perfect. "Miss, I'm a forest ranger. Can you hear me?" I was about 10 feet away when she finally turned around. Her eyes were gone. Not closed, not covered, gone. Where her eyes should have been were just empty sockets, dark and deep. But somehow, I knew she was looking at me. I could feel her attention like ice water in my veins. She opened her mouth and spoke in a voice like wind through dead leaf. He's coming back, Billy. The red-eyed angel is coming back, and this time he's hungry." I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam dancing wildly. When I got the light steady again, she was gone. The clearing was empty except for me and the packed dirt and the sound of my own breathing. I ran back to my truck and drove straight to the sheriff's office. But when I tried to tell Mason what I'd seen, the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain a woman with no eyes who knew your name? Instead, I just reported strange lights in the forest and requested additional patrols in the area. But I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. He's coming back. Coming back from where? And what did she mean by, "This time he's hungry"? I was about to find out. The next night, Sarah Henderson went missing. She was Tom Henderson's 17-year-old granddaughter, visiting for Christmas break from college. Beautiful girl with long blonde hair and her grandmother's bright blue eyes. Tom found her bedroom window open and the screen cut clean through. No footprints in the mud below, no sign of a struggle, just an empty room and a cold wind blowing through the window. I joined the search at dawn. 30 volunteers spread out across the hills and valleys, calling Sarah's name and checking every cave and hollow. Sheriff Mason brought in dogs from the state police, but they kept getting confused. They'd follow a scent for a few hundred yards, then stop and whine like they'd lost the trail. By sunset, we hadn't found anything. The volunteers went home to their families, but I stayed out. I knew these woods better than anyone, and I had a bad feeling about where Sarah might be. I drove back to the TNT bunkers as darkness fell. The old concrete structures looked like giant tombstones in my headlights. During the war, they'd stored enough explosives to level half of West Virginia. Now they were just empty shells, home to bats and spiders and things that liked the dark. I was checking the third bunker when I heard singing. It was coming from inside the concrete structure, echoing off the walls. A young woman's voice, sweet and clear, singing an old hymn my grandmother used to hum. "In the sweet by and by." "Sarah?" I called out. "Sarah Henderson?" The singing stopped. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside the bunker. The concrete walls were covered in graffiti from decades of teenagers, names and dates and dirty jokes carved into the stone. But tonight, there was something new. Words scratched into the wall, fresh enough that concrete dust still littered the floor below them. "The red-eyed angel feeds on fear and sorrow. Sarah sees the future now. The dam will break in spring." "Sarah!" I shouted. "Where are you?" My voice echoed through the empty bunker and faded to silence. I swept my flashlight beam across every corner, but there was no sign of the girl, just those fresh scratches in the concrete and the smell of something dead. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps on the bunker roof, slow, deliberate steps, like someone was walking back and forth above my head. But the roof was 20 feet up, with no ladder or stairs to reach it. The footsteps stopped directly over me. Something wet dripped down and splashed on my shoulder. I touched it with my finger and held it up to my flashlight. Blood. Fresh blood, still warm. More drops fell, pattering like rain on the concrete floor. I backed toward the entrance, but before I could reach it, something landed outside with a wet thud. I turned off my flashlight and crept to the doorway. In the moonlight, I could see a shape lying on the ground about 20 feet away. It was too big to be Sarah, too big to be human at all. I turned my light back on and nearly dropped it. It was the Hendersons' bull, Chester, the same bull I'd seen hanging from the power lines 3 days ago. But now he was here, outside this bunker, and he was moving. Chester rolled over and stood up on unstead legs. His movements were wrong, jerky, like a puppet on strings. His eyes reflected my flashlight beam, but they weren't brown anymore. They were red, bright red like stoplights. The bull turned toward me and opened his mouth. Instead of a moo, what came out was Sarah Henderson's voice. "Billy," the bull said with Sarah's voice. "Billy, help me. I'm trapped inside and I can't get out." I fumbled for my radio, but my hands were shaking too hard to work the controls. The bull took a step toward me, its red eyes getting brighter. "Please, Billy. It's so dark in here. So cold." He made me watch what's going to happen. The dam at Hawk's Nest is going to break. All those people are going to die, and I can see their faces. "That's not Sarah," I whispered to myself. "That's not her." But the voice kept coming from the bull's mouth, desperate and scared. "He showed me the future, Billy. The water rushing down the valley, washing away houses and cars and people. Children screaming for their parents. I can see it all and I can't make it stop." The bull was only 10 feet away now, close enough that I could smell the decay coming off its body. Chester had been dead for 3 days, but something was wearing him like a coat. That's when I saw them. The wings. They unfolded from behind the bull's body like black umbrellas opening, 15 feet from tip to tip, covered in what looked like thick fur or feathers. The wings beat once, stirring up dust and dead leaves, and Chester's body lifted off the ground. The bull floated in the air, its red eyes locked on mine, Sarah's voice still coming from its mouth. "It hurts, Billy. Being inside this dead thing hurts so much. But he says I have to stay until I've warned everyone. The dam will break in April when the snow melts. You have to tell them. You have to make them listen." I finally got my radio working and called for backup, but all I got was static. The floating bull drifted closer, and I could see something moving inside its mouth, something that looked like a young woman's face pressed against the inside of Chester, his teeth like she was trapped behind glass. "Run, Billy," Sarah's voice whispered. "He's coming. The red-eyed angel is coming, and he's so hungry. He wants to show you the future, too. He wants to put you inside something dead and make you watch." I ran. I ran through the dark forest, crashing through branches and jumping over logs, not caring about the noise I was making. Behind me I could hear the sound of wings beating the air and Sarah's voice calling my name. I made it to my truck and peeled out, spinning gravel and mud as I raced away from the bunkers. In my rearview mirror, I could see something big flying above the trees, following me. Red lights blinked in the darkness like the eyes of a giant. I drove straight to the sheriff's office and told Mason everything. He listened without interrupting, his face getting more worried with every word. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "Billy, I've known you for 15 years. You're not the type to make up stories or see things that aren't there, but what you're telling me, it's impossible. I know how it sounds, but Sarah Henderson is missing, and there's something in those woods that isn't natural. We need to organize a search party, and..." Mason held up his hand. "We found Sarah 2 hours ago." My heart jumped. "Is she okay? Where was she?" "She was sitting in her grandfather's barn, naked and covered in mud. Says she doesn't remember anything after going to bed last night. The doctor checked her over. No injuries, no sign of... well, no sign that anyone hurt her. But Billy, there's something you need to know." He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper covered in pencil marks. "She drew this while we were waiting for her grandfather to come pick her up. Says she had to draw it, that someone was making her do it." I looked at the drawing and felt my blood turn to ice. It showed Hawk's Nest Dam with a huge crack running down the middle. Water poured through the crack like a waterfall, flooding the valley below. Tiny stick figures ran from the rushing water, but most of them were already underwater. At the top of the page, Sarah had written a date, April 15th, 1988. "There's more," Mason said. He pulled out another sheet. This one showed a creature with massive wings and glowing red eyes, standing on top of the dam. The creature had the body of a man but the head of a moth with huge eyes that took up most of its face. At the bottom of the page, Sarah had written, "The red-eyed angel sees tomorrow's sorrow." I stared at the drawings, my hands shaking. "We have to evacuate the valley, get everyone away from the dam." Based on what? A teenager's drawings? Billy, you know I can't do that. "Then inspect the dam. Send engineers to check the structure." Mason nodded slowly. "That I can do. I'll make some calls in the morning." But as I drove home that night, I knew it might not be enough. Whatever was in those woods, whatever had taken Sarah and filled her head with visions of the future, it wasn't done yet. The red-eyed angel was still hungry, and I was starting to understand what it was hungry for. The dam inspection was scheduled for January 15th, but the creature didn't wait that long. On New Year's Eve, it came for me. I was working my regular night patrol, checking the fire roads and campsites for frozen pipes and ice damage. The temperature had dropped to 15 below, cold enough to kill someone if they got stranded outside. My truck's heater was running full blast, but I could still see my breath. Around midnight, I was driving past Miller's Pond when my headlights caught something moving on the ice. At first, I thought it might be a deer that had fallen through and was trying to get out. But as I got closer, I saw it was a person, a woman in a white dress, walking across the frozen pond like she was taking a Sunday stroll. The same woman I'd seen in the clearing a week ago, the one with empty eye sockets. I synced, opped the truck, and grabbed my spotlight. The beam lit her up like she was on stage. She turned toward me and waved, casual as anything. Then she pointed toward the far side of the pond. That's when I saw the others. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. People in old-fashioned clothes, walking on the ice or standing in groups like they were having a party. Men in work clothes and overalls, women in long dresses, children in patched coats and bare feet. All of them had empty eye sockets where their eyes should have been. I recognized some of the faces from old photographs in the local history museum. Coal miners who'd died in the 1952 cave-in. Families who'd drowned when Hurricane Camille flooded the valley in 1969. 46 people who'd been on the Silver Bridge when it collapsed in 1967. They were all there, walking on Miller's Pond, and they were all looking at me. The woman in the white dress started walking toward my truck. With each step, the ice cracked and groaned, but it didn't break. She walked right up to my passenger window and pressed her face against the glass. "Hello, Billy," she said, her voice muffled but clear. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to start the truck, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The radio was dead and my cell phone showed no signal. The woman smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too sharp. "Don't be afraid. We're here to help. The red-eyed angel sent us to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" "To see tomorrow's sorrow. To carry the weight of future pain. Someone has to witness what's coming, Billy. Someone has to remember." The ice started cracking under her feet, spiderweb fractures spreading out in all directions. But instead of falling through, she rose up into the air, floating a few feet above the frozen pond. That's when I saw him, the red-eyed angel. He landed on the hood of my truck with a sound like thunder. Sev, and feet tall, with the body of a muscular man covered in dark fur. His head was enormous, shaped like a moth's but the size of a basketball. 2 huge eyes took up most of his face, glowing, red like the coals of hell. When he spread his wings, they blocked out the stars. 15 feet from tip to tip, covered in thick gray fur that rippled in the cold wind. He folded them around himself like a cloak and leaned down to look through my windshield. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Those red eyes held me like a snake holds a mouse, and I felt something crawling inside my skull. Fingers of ice-cold thought, poking around in my memories. "You were in Vietnam," a voice said inside my head. "You saw men die. You know what sorrow looks like." Images flashed through my mind. Not my memories, but visions of things that hadn't happened yet. The dam at Hawk's Nest cracking on a warm April morning, water rushing down the valley, 20 feet high and moving like a freight train. Houses lifted off their foundations and smashed to pieces, cars swept away with families still inside. 237 people will die, the voice continued. Unless someone warns them, unless someone makes them listen. "Why me?" I managed to whisper. The creature tilted its massive head, studying me with those burning eyes. "Because you understand sorrow. Because you've carried the weight of death before. And because you're the only one who can see us clearly." The visions kept coming, faster now. I saw myself standing in front of the town council, trying to convince them to evacuate the valley. I saw them laughing, dismissing me as a crazy old soldier who'd finally snapped. I saw the dam breaking anyway, and all those people dying because no one would listen. "That's one future," the voice said. "But there are others." The scene changed. Now I saw myself going to the dam directly, setting explosives to create a controlled breach that would lower the water level safely. But in this vision, I was caught and arrested, branded as a terrorist trying to destroy government property. Another future. But still, people die. Vision after vision flashed through my mind. In some, I convinced authorities to drain the reservoir. In others, I failed completely. But in every single one, people died. Maybe not as many, but still dozens or hundreds. "Why are you showing me this?" I thought back. Because someone must choose. Someone must decide which future becomes real. The burden of choice is the price of knowledge. The creature leaned closer, its breath fogging the windshield. Up close, I could see that its red eyes weren't solid. They were like windows into somewhere else, and through them I glimpsed infinite futures spreading out like branches on a tree. I am not your enemy, Billy Crowfield. I am a messenger. I appear before great sorrows to give warning. But warnings are worthless if no one listens. The Silver Bridge, I said. You were there before it fell. Yes. And before the mine collapse in 1952, and before the chemical spill in 1978. I have walked this valley for 70 years, carrying news of tomorrow's pain. But humans rarely listen to angels, especially ones with red eyes. The woman in the white dress floated closer to my window. He chose us to help carry the message. We died in disasters he tried to prevent. Now we serve him, trying to save others from our fate. I looked out at all the dead people standing on the ice. Men, women, and children who died in accidents and disasters, now conscripted into service as messengers from beyond. What happens if I refuse? The creature's eyes flared brighter. Then you join them. Your body dies, but your spirit remains to help convince the next person I choose. Death is not the end, Billy Crowfield. It is only a change of duty. I thought about Sarah Henderson, how she'd been returned with her head full of visions and her ability to draw the future. What did you do to the girl? I gave her a gift, the ability to see what is coming. She will spend the rest of her life drawing pictures of future sorrows, warning people who will call her crazy. It is a heavy burden, but necessary. And if I agree to help, then you live. But you carry the knowledge of what is coming. You must find a way to prevent it, knowing that most people will not believe you. And when the next disaster approaches, I will visit you again. The truck's engine suddenly roared to life. The radio crackled with static, then cleared to normal dispatcher chatter. My cell phone showed full signal strength. The creature stepped back from the hood, his massive wings spreading wide. Choose quickly, Billy Crowfield. Dawn is coming, and I must return to the spaces between seconds. Will you carry my message, or will you join the others on the ice? I looked at the dead people surrounding my truck. Dozens of faces, all staring at me with empty eye sockets. All of them had been given the same choice I was facing now. All of them had chosen death over the burden of knowledge. But I thought about the 237 people who would die when the dam broke. Families with children, old couples who'd lived their whole lives in the valley, young people just starting out. All of them unaware that death was coming with the spring floods. I'll do it, I said. I'll carry your message. The creature nodded once. Then he spread his wings and launched himself into the air, disappearing into the dark sky like he'd never been there at all. The dead people on the ice started walking away, fading like morning mist until the pond was empty again. Only the woman in the white dress remained, still floating outside my window. Thank you, Billy, she said. You've made the right choice. Who are you? My name was Margaret Cole. I died on the Silver Bridge 20 years ago. I was pregnant with my first child. She smiled sadly. The red-eyed angel tried to warn us, but no one listened. Don't let that happen again. Then she was gone too, and I was alone in my truck beside the frozen pond. I drove home as tea. The sun was coming up, my head full of visions and my heart heavy with knowledge I didn't want. But I had work to do. I had 237 people to save. The engineers found the crack on January 20th. It was exactly where Sarah Henderson had drawn it in her picture. A hairline fracture running down the center of Hawk's Nest Dam. The concrete was old, built in 1936, and 50 years of freeze-thaw cycles had weakened the structure more than anyone realized. It's not critical yet, the chief engineer told the emergency meeting at City Hall. But with the spring melt coming, we need to lower the reservoir level by at least 20 feet. Start draining now, gradually, so we don't cause flooding downstream. I sat in the back of the room, listening to them plan the controlled water release. They were taking it seriously, thank God. No one asked how I'd known to request the inspection, and I didn't volunteer the information. The draining started the next day. pumps worked around the clock to lower the water level safely. By March, the reservoir was down 30 feet, taking pressure off the weakened dam. Emergency repairs were scheduled for summer, when the water level would be at its lowest. Sarah Henderson never drew another picture. The vision stopped after that night in the bunker, but she was different. Quiet. She'd catch herself staring off into space, like she was seeing things the rest of us couldn't. Her grandfather said she'd wake up screaming sometimes, calling out names of people who weren't there. I knew how she felt. The red-eyed angel had left me with my own burden of knowledge. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see those 237 faces, the people who would have died if the dam had broken on schedule. I'd saved them, but I was the only one who knew it. The creature didn't come back that spring. The controlled release worked perfectly, and when the snow melted in April, the dam held strong. A few people in town grumbled about the inconvenience of lower water levels in the reservoir, but nobody died. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe the red-eyed angel would move on to some other valley, some other disaster that needed preventing. I was wrong. He came back in September, just after I'd started to sleep through the night again. This time he appeared in my living room while I was watching the evening news. One moment I was alone. The next, those massive wings were folding around him like a dark cloak. "There is a fire coming," his voice whispered in my mind. The chemical plant. October 31st, Halloween night. 43 people will die in the explosion. The visions started again. Workers trapped in a burning building, families evacuated from their homes as toxic smoke filled the air, children in the hospital struggling to breathe through damaged lungs. You know what you must do. And I did. I called in anonymous tips about safety violations. I reported gas leaks that hadn't happened yet. I made myself such a nuisance that the plant management finally agreed to a full safety inspection just to shut me up. They found 17 code violations and a main gas line that was about to rupture. The plant was shut down for repairs on October 30th, one day before the explosion would have happened. 43 people went home to their families that night, never knowing how close they'd come to dying. This became my life. Every few months, the red-eyed angel would visit with news of some future disaster. A school bus accident on icy roads, a house fire that would trap a family of 5, a bridge collapse during morning rush hour. I prevented them all using anonymous tips and fake emergencies and whatever else it took to get people's attention. I became the crazy old ranger who saw danger everywhere, but I didn't care. Let them think I was paranoid. At least they were alive to think it. The thing about carrying knowledge of the future is that it changes you. You see people differently when you know how they're going to do. You can't form normal relationships when you're always watching for signs of the next disaster. I retired from the Forest Service in 1995, 8 years earlier than planned. Officially, it was due to stress-related health issues. Unofficially, it was because I couldn't focus on regular ranger duties when I was always waiting for the next visit from my red-eyed messenger. But retirement didn't end my responsibilities. If anything, it made them worse. Without the structure of a day job, I had more time to think about the weight I was carrying. More time to count the faces of people I'd saved. Faces they would never know belonged to them. By 2000, I'd prevented 17 disasters and saved over 400 lives. The red-eyed angel never thanked me, never acknowledged the success of our partnership. He simply appeared when the next warning needed to be delivered, shared his visions of future sorrow, and disappeared again. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if I just ignored him. If I let one disaster play out naturally, would he leave me alone? But every time I considered it, I'd see those faces again. The children who would die in the school fire, the wedding party that would be crushed when the church roof collapsed, the night shift workers who would be poisoned by the chemical leak. I couldn't let them die, not when I had the power to save them. Sarah Henderson moved away after she graduated high school, left West Virginia, and never came back, according to her grandfather. I couldn't blame her. Carrying visions of death is no life for a young person. At least my burden came with the wisdom of middle age. She'd been just 17 when the creature filled her head with nightmares. Tom Henderson died in 2003, peaceful in his sleep at age 78. The bulls and cows that had been drained of blood were never explained officially. The reports listed them as predator attacks by unknown large bird species. Sometimes the truth is too strange for paperwork. I still live in the same house I bought when I started working for the Forest Service. Still keep my night vision goggles and emergency radio in working order. Still patrol the woods around Kanawha State Forest, even though I'm not getting paid for it anymore. Because the red-eyed angel isn't the only thing that lives in these hills. There are other creatures in the spaces between seconds. Things that feed on fear and sorrow. Things that whisper promises of power to people desperate enough to listen. The angel keeps them in check, but only as long as someone is willing to carry his warnings. I'm 68 years old now. My hands shake when I write, and my eyes aren't what they used to be. Sometimes I wonder who will take over when I'm gone. Who will be strong enough to see the red eyes and accept the burden? Maybe it will be you. Maybe you're reading this because you've started seeing things others can't. Maybe you've noticed that animals act strange around you, or that electronics malfunction when you're upset. Maybe you've had dreams about disasters that haven't happened yet. If so, then you're being prepared. The red-eyed angel is watching you, deciding if you're worthy of his terrible gift. My advice? Don't fight it. Don't try to convince yourself that what you're seeing isn't real. The sooner you accept the truth, the sooner you can start saving lives. And remember, the angel isn't your enemy. He's a messenger, carrying warnings from tomorrow back to today. He appears before disasters not to cause them, but to prevent them. The red eyes that terrify so many people are actually windows into the future, showing us what needs to be changed. The question isn't whether you'll see him eventually. If you're reading this, you probably already have. The question is whether you'll be brave enough to listen when he speaks. Because somewhere out there, right now, people are going about their normal lives with no idea that death is coming for them. They're dead, drinking coffee, kissing their children goodbye, making plans for next weekend. And the only thing standing between them and disaster is someone willing to carry tomorrow's sorrow back to today. Someone like me, someone like you. The red-eyed angel is always watching, always waiting, always ready to share his burden with those strong enough to bear it. Are you ready? My name is Franklin Copperfield, but everybody calls me Ridge. I've been a park ranger here at Cumberland Gap for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, even the occasional moonshiner still trying to run his granddaddy's recipe. But I was wrong, dead wrong. The thing about being a ranger is that people expect you to know everything. When a family asks about the old Cherokee trails, I can tell them exactly where Daniel Boone carved his name into a beech tree. When hunters want to know about wildlife patterns, I can read tracks like a book and predict where the deer will be come morning. I learned most of this from my wife Sarah's people. She's part Cherokee, and her uncle Standing Bear taught me things about these woods that aren't in any ranger manual. Cumberland Gap sits right where Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia come together, and it's been a crossroads for thousands of years. The Cherokee called it the Great Indian Warpath, and later it became the Wilderness Road that brought settlers west. These mountains have seen everything: ancient hunting parties, Civil War raiders, logging crews, and now tourists with their cameras and bug spray. In September of 1969, the leaves were just starting to turn, and we were getting that Indian summer heat that makes the days feel like July but drops the temperature down to the 40s at night. I'd been doing more historical interpretation work lately, teaching folks about the old ways of tracking and surviving in the wilderness. Most people think it's all romantic, this idea of living off the land. But the truth is, these mountains can kill you in a dozen different ways if you don't respect them. That's what I always told the hunting parties. Show respect. Know your limits. The forest doesn't care about your plans. I should have listened to my own advice. It started on a Tuesday morning when 4 experienced hunters failed to check in. Bob McKenzie, Tom Wheeler, Danny Ross, and Jim Patterson, all local men who'd been hunting these ridges since they were boys. They'd gotten permits for a 5-day trip in the backcountry, planning to camp near the old Wilderness Road Trail about 8 miles from the main visitor center. When they didn't show up Tuesday evening like planned, I wasn't too worried. Hunters get excited about a good spot and stay an extra day or two all the time. But when Wednesday came and went with no word, and their families started calling, I knew something was wrong. Thursday morning, I packed my gear and headed up the trail to their last known campsite. The path follows the same route Daniel Boone took 200 years ago, winding through thick stands of oak and maple, crossing creek beds that run cold and clear even in dry weather. It's beautiful country, but it's also wild country. Cell phones don't work, and if something goes wrong, you're on your own until someone comes looking. I found their camp about noon, and right away I knew this wasn't a normal hunting accident. The campsite looked like a tornado had hit it, but wrong somehow. Their tent was shredded, not torn like you'd expect from wind or an animal attack. The fabric was cut in long, deliberate strips that hung like ribbons from the remaining frame. Their cooking gear was scattered in a perfect circle around where the fire had been, every piece exactly the same distance from the cold ashes. But it was the rifles that made my blood run cold. All 4 hunting rifles were snapped in half, not broken from a fall or damaged by impact, snapped clean through the metal like someone had grabbed both ends and twisted with impossible strength. The ammunition was scattered around the campsite, each bullet placed with the same weird precision on as the cooking gear, forming another perfect circle. I've seen what bears can do to a campsite. I've cleaned up after mountain lion attacks. This wasn't either of those things. I called in the Discovery on my radio, but the signal was weak this far into the backcountry. All I could get through was found campsite, equipment destroyed, no sign of hunters. Investigating. The response crackled back, broken and full of static. Copy Ridge, back up en route, be careful. I started looking for tracks, and that's when things got really strange. The ground around the campsite was soft from recent rain, perfect for reading sign. I found boot prints from all 4 men, leading in different directions like they'd scattered in panic. But mixed in with their tracks were prints I'd never seen before. They looked like mountain lion paws at first glance, big, round, with clear claw marks. But when I knelt down for a closer look, I saw something that made no sense. Overlapping each cat print was what looked like a human handprint, as if someone had been crawling on all 4s, but with human hands instead of paws. The prints showed both pads and knuckles, like whatever made them could switch between walking on 2 legs and 4. I followed the strange tracks away from the campsite, deeper into the woods. They led me through a grove of ancient hemlocks, where the canopy was so thick it felt like twilight even in the middle of the day. The prints stayed clear and easy to follow, which should have been my first warning. No animal leaves tracks that obvious unless it wants to be followed. About a quarter mile from camp, I found Bob Mackenzie's hunting jacket hanging from a tree branch. It was folded neat as you please, like someone had taken care not to wrinkle it. The jacket smelled wrong, not just of Bob's aftershave and cigarettes, but of something wild and musky that made the hair on my neck stand up. I was examining the jacket when I heard the dogs. 3 bloodhounds from the county search and rescue team were coming up the trail with Deputy Sheriff Morrison. I could hear them baying in the distance, following my scent to the campsite. But as they got closer to where I was standing, their baying changed to whimpering. When they finally reached me, those dogs, trained to track through anything, took one sniff of the area and backed away with their tails between their legs. The lead dog, a big male named Duke, who'd found dozens of lost hikers, actually lay down and refused to move. Morrison had to drag him away from the tree where I'd found the jacket. "What the hell's wrong with them?" Morrison asked, but I didn't have an answer. We spent the rest of the day searching, but it was like those 4 men had just vanished. We found more of their gear scattered through the woods, always folded neat, always placed carefully, always surrounded by those impossible tracks. But no sign of the hunters themselves. That night, back at the ranger station, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those tracks, those broken rifles, the way the dogs had acted. I'd grown up in these mountains, learned their secrets from people who'd lived here for generations. But this was something new, something I didn't understand. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and walked out onto the station porch. The night was clear and cold, with a full moon turning everything silver. In the distance, I could see the dark ridge where we'd found the campsite. That's when I heard it. A woman's voice, calling from somewhere up in those hills. She was speaking Cherokee, words I recognized from Sarah's family, though I couldn't make out what she was saying. The voice carried impossibly far in the still air, echoing off the mountain faces like she was calling from every direction at once. The hair on my arm stood up as I realized what she was saying. Come find me. Come find me. Come find me. But there was something wrong with the voice, something that made my skin crawl. It sounded like a woman, but underneath the words was something else, a rumbling growl that no human throat could make. I stood on that porch listening until dawn, but the voice never came again. The next morning I drove over to see Sarah's uncle, Standing Bear. He lived in a small house on the Cherokee Reservation about 20 miles from the park. At 83, he was one of the few people left who remembered the old stories the way they were supposed to be told. I found him sitting on his front porch, working on a piece of wood carving. When I showed him the photos I'd taken of the tracks, his face went white. "Where did you find these?" he asked. "Up on the Wilderness Road Trail. 4 hunters are missing." Standing Bear set down his carving and looked at me with eyes that seemed older than the mountains themselves. "Ridge, you need to stay away from there. Those are wampus tracks." I'd heard the name before. Wampus Cat was one of those local legends that tour guides like to tell around campfires. But Standing Bear wasn't talking about legends. The wampus was a Cherokee woman, long time ago, he said. She wanted to know the men's secrets, so she wrapped herself in a mountain lion skin and spied on their sacred ceremonies. When the medicine men caught her, they cursed her to wear that skin forever, part woman, part cat, never belonging to either world. "Uncle, that's just a story." "Is it?" He held up the photo of the tracks. "Look at these prints, Ridge. Look at them with your ranger eyes and tell me what animal made them." I looked again, and this time I saw what had been bothering me. The spacing was wrong. The cat prints and the handprints weren't overlapping by accident. They were made by the same creature, something that could walk on 2 legs or 4 depending on what it needed to do. "She's still out there," Standing Bear continued, "still guarding the sacred places from men who don't show proper respect. Those hunters, did they disturb anything they shouldn't have?" I thought about the campsite, about the scattered GE, are arranged in perfect circles. Something nagged at me, a detail I'd noticed but hadn't really processed. "There was a pile of stones," I said slowly. Old stones. Looked like they'd been stacked there for years. They were knocked down, scattered around. Standing Bear closed his eyes. "A burial marker. They camped on sacred ground and disturbed the dead." That afternoon, I hiked back to the campsite with a Cherokee blessing Standing Bear had taught me. The words felt strange in my mouth, but I said them anyway as I rebuilt the stone cairn the hunters had destroyed. As I placed the last stone, I heard something moving in the woods behind me. I turned around slowly, every instinct screaming danger. About 50 yards away, just at the edge of where the shadows got too thick to see clearly, something was watching me. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, and moved wrong, like it couldn't decide whether to stand upright or drop to all 4s. In the dim light filtering through the trees, I caught glimpses of yellow eyes and something that might have been a woman's face, but stretched and changed in ways that made my mind refuse to process what I was seeing. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it dropped down and vanished into the undergrowth without making a sound. I ran back to the ranger station and called for backup. The Kentucky State Police sent a team with dogs and tracking equipment. We spent 3 days combing every inch of the backcountry, but it was like searching for a ghost. The dogs picked up scent trails that led to impossible places, up cliff faces too steep to climb, across creeks too wide to jump, into thorn thickets too thick for anything larger than a rabbit to pass through. On the 3rd day, we found Tom Wheeler. He was hanging upside down from a tree branch about 15 feet off the ground, positioned so carefully it looked like he was sleeping. There wasn't a mark on him except for his neck, which had been broken with surgical precision. The coroner said later it was a single bite from something with jaws powerful enough to crush bone. Tom had been placed there with the same careful attention as the scattered gear at the campsite. His clothes were neat, his hands folded across his chest. Someone, or something, had taken the time to arrange him respectfully. But the worst part was his face. Tom Wheeler had died terrified. But underneath the fear was something else. Recognition. Like he'd seen his killer clearly and understood exactly what was happening to him. The search team wanted to pull back after that, but I couldn't leave the other 3 men out there. That night, I snuck back into the woods alone. I'd made it about a mile up the trail when I heard the voice again. Ridge. It was calling my name this time, in perfect English. Ridge, come find me. The voice was coming from ahead of me on the trail, but when I moved toward it, it seemed to shift, staying always just out of reach. I followed it deeper into the woods, past places I'd explored 100 times before, until I realized I was somewhere I'd never seen. The trees here were different, older, thicker, growing in patterns that seemed deliberate. There were more stone cairns scattered through the forest, and I could feel the weight of years pressing down like a physical thing. Ridge. The voice was closer now, coming from just ahead. You're different from the others. You know the old ways. I stopped walking. Every ranger instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and run, but something kept me rooted in place. What do you want? I called out. Justice, came the reply, and this time I could hear the growl underneath the words clearly. They violated sacred ground, disturbed the sleeping dead. There are consequences for such things. A shape moved between the trees ahead of me, tall, graceful, and completely wrong. As it stepped into a patch of moonlight, I got my first clear yes. Just look at the wampus cat. She stood upright like a woman, but her face was all mountain lion, golden fur, black-tipped ears, yellow eyes that held human intelligence. Her hands ended in claws that could probably punch through steel, and when she moved, it was with a predator's perfect silence. The other 3 are still alive, she said, for now, but they must answer for what they did. Where are they? I asked. She smiled, showing fangs that belonged on something twice her size. Safe, protected, learning the weight of their disrespect. Then she was gone, vanishing between one heartbeat and the next. I made it back to the station just before dawn, but I didn't report what I'd seen. Who would believe me? The next morning, we found Danny Ross. Danny was arranged in the exact center of the destroyed campsite, positioned like he was kneeling in prayer. Like Tom, his neck had been broken by a single powerful bite, but there was something else. His hands were covered in dirt, and under his fingernails were fragments of old bone. The medical examiner found more bone fragments in his pockets, pieces of what looked like very old human remains. Danny had been digging where he shouldn't have been digging. That night I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my gear and headed back into the woods, but this time I wasn't going as a ranger. I was going as someone who'd learned respect for these mountains from people who'd walked them for 1,000 years. I followed the stone cairns deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone before, past the official park boundaries and into land that belonged to the Cherokee Nation. The trees here were ancient, their trunks so thick it would take 6 men holding hands to circle them. This was old-growth forest, the kind that had covered these mountains before the first Europeans set foot in America. I found her waiting for me in a clearing I knew I'd never find again. In the moonlight, the wampus cat looked more human than she had before, but somehow that made her more terrifying, not less. She could have been a beautiful Cherokee. Woman, except for the golden eyes and the way she moved like flowing water. You came alone, she said, without weapons, without disrespect. I came to understand, I replied, using the Cherokee greeting Standing Bear had taught me. She tilted her head, studying me. Your wife's people taught you well. You know the old ways, the proper ways. That's why I haven't killed you. What about Jim Patterson? Is he still alive? He is. But his fate depends on whether you can convince me that white men can learn to respect what they don't understand. She led me deeper into the clearing, to where ancient Cherokee pictographs were carved into a massive boulder. The symbols seemed to shift and dance in the moonlight, telling stories I could barely comprehend. This is a sacred place, she said. where my people spoke with the spirits of the dead for 1,000 years. Your hunters made their camp on top of a burial ground, scattered the bones of my ancestors like trash, and laughed about Indian superstitions while they did it. I felt sick. I'd seen the scattered bones at the campsite and assumed they were from some animal. The medical examiner had confirmed they were human, but old, very old. They didn't know, I said weakly. Ignorance is not an excuse for desecration. Her voice carried the rumble of a mountain lion's growl. Would you camp in your people's graveyard? Would you scatter your grandmother's bones to make room for your tent? She was right, and we both knew it. I can teach them, I said. I can make sure this never happens again. Can you? She stepped closer, and I could see myself reflected in those golden eyes. Can you make white men respect red graves? Can you teach them to ask permission before they take what isn't theirs? Before I could answer, she whistled, a sound like wind through pine trees. Jim Patterson stumbled into the clearing, alive, but changed. His hair had gone completely white, and his eyes held the same wild look I'd seen on Tom Wheeler's face. When he saw me, he grabbed my arm with shaking hands. Ridge, thank God. We didn't know. We thought they were animal bones, maybe from some old hunting camp. We just moved them aside to clear space for the tent. We didn't know they were people. The wampus cat watched us with those impossible eyes. What would be justice here, Ridge Copperfield? What would your Cherokee family say should happen to men who disturb the sacred dead? I thought about Standing Bear's stories, about the old laws that governed behavior in the forest. Cherokee justice was about balance, about restoring what had been broken. They should make it right, I said finally. Replace what was scattered. Honor what was dishonored. Learn to do better. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You will teach them. You will make sure every person who enters these woods knows where the sacred places are, knows how to show proper respect. You will be guardian of the old ways among the new people. I will, I promised. And if they fail to learn, if they continue to desecrate and destroy? I met those golden eyes and understood what she was really asking. Then justice will be done. She smiled, and for just a moment she looked like a normal Cherokee woman, beautiful, ancient, and infinitely sad. Take him home, Ridge. But remember, the mountains see everything. The dead remember every insult. Respect the sacred places, or face the consequences. When I blinked, she was gone. Jim Patterson and I made it back to the ranger station just as the sun was coming up. He spent 3 days in the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him except shock and exhaustion. Officially, the 4 hunters had encountered a large predator, probably a mountain lion, that had killed 3 of them before Jim managed to escape. Unofficially, I knew the truth. I spent the next month working with Standing Bear and other Cherokee elders to map every sacred site within the park boundaries. We marked them on official park maps as culturally sensitive areas and established new regulations requiring permits and Cherokee guides for anyone wanting to camp or hunt in those locations. It wasn't easy convincing the Park Service to change their policies based on Indian superstitions, but I had advantages now. I could sense when someone was planning to violate sacred ground. I could hear the forest's warnings in ways I'd never been able to before, and I aged slower than I should have. Something Standing Bear said was a gift from the guardian spirit. Over the years, I've guided thousands of visitors through these mountains, teaching them the proper ways to move through Cherokee land. Most listen. Some don't. The ones who don't tend to have accidents. Nothing as dramatic as what happened to the hunters in 1969, but accidents nonetheless. Broken bones from falls that shouldn't have happened. Getting lost in areas they knew well. Equipment failures at crucial moments. The mountains remember everything. Jim Patterson never hunted again. He moved to Florida and became a minister, spending the rest of his life trying to atone for disturbing graves he didn't even know existed. Before he died in 1995, he sent me a letter. Ridge, I dream about her every night. Not nightmares. She's not angry anymore. But she's still watching, still making sure we remember what respect means. Tell people the truth. Tell them the mountains are alive, and they're not forgiving. I retired from the Park Service in 1989, but I still live here in the Gap. Sarah and I raised our children to know both worlds, the modern one with its roads and radios, and the ancient one where spirits still walk and justice wears a mountain lion's face. Sometimes, late at night when the moon is full, I still hear her voice calling from the ridges. Not hunting now, just watching, making sure the sacred places stay sacred. The Cherokee have a saying, "The land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land." The wampus cat taught me what that really means. These mountains have their own laws, older than any government, and the penalty for breaking them hasn't changed in 1,000 years. So when you visit Cumberland Gap, when you walk the trails where Daniel Boone once passed, remember that you're not just in a park. You're in a sacred place where the first people lived and died and were buried according to laws you might not understand, but must respect. The mountains are beautiful. They're also watching, and they remember everything.